go back to the regular programming. Thank you for joining our podcast, and I'm excited to learn more. You have extensive experience in running product organization in various functions and roles. So share with us and our audience a little bit on, Tanya, what are some of the challenges you run into? One of them is like a more persistent across your career, and then maybe we can also talk about some of them are more relevant to you today that you try to solve.
Yeah, of course. So, starting with a more persistent problem, as you've mentioned, being a product manager and leading product teams for a while, it's definitely this predictability factor, and especially as companies grow and product lines evolve, and there is this dependency that grows between the product lines, the portfolios, and the teams that need to build that functionality. It becomes really, really messy to figure out where the teams are, what they need, what the dependencies are, and not just within the product and engineering teams. That in itself is a huge problem, but also to external stakeholders, or I should say, internal to the company, right? Stakeholders to the executive team. How do they get enough information to understand what's going on, when something will get delivered, and of course to the operational team within the company, those that need to support our clients, those that need to implement new functionality and answer the questions about products, as well as, of course, the sales team. The sales team needs to know what's on the roadmap and when it's going to be done. And one of the biggest challenges with that, and outside of just coordinating everything and making sure that the teams are rowing in the same direction, is predictability, right? So, executive team wants to know when it's going to be done, and they often don't understand why certain quote unquote simple tasks take a long time. The
Right.
sales organization obviously needs predictability because they always tell us, "Hey, we're okay to sell it, knowing that it's coming in Q2, Q3, Q4, whatever you guys tell us." But when we do tell them that, it does need to be predictable. So I've seen this happening all around different companies and different industries when I was an individual product manager and I was leading product teams. So it's a problem worth solving, and I think product operations definitely can help with that. It won't make it perfect, but it can definitely help with that.
Right. You touch on so many things. I want to double click on that because I heard this often and from different teams, right? And just completely honest, that's one of the reasons Dragonboat was started was understanding even what's going on. I think what you said something very interesting, and sometimes people don't realize that, is that predictability is not just because people want to know when things gonna be available because they want to know. It's not a controlling a big brother type of thing, right? Because there are really product is the engine of the business. And especially in the product centric company, like you said, right? We want a sales team want to know so that they can sell it. That means there's a dollar sign behind it. It's so that understanding what is going to be available and then when is a very important because there's a huge amount of the business future, regardless of your sales or CFO, whomever come up with a plan, there's a product I need to support that. That's a very important thing that people sometimes forget. So it's good that you mentioned that. I think we really want to rise that visibility broader in terms of understanding deliveries, not just because we want to know, it's that because there are other teams involved. The second part you mentioned is very interesting about is that I think you said leadership needs to know what is going to be available, and the cross-functional team needs to know, in addition to revenue, potential selling, you also mentioned things about how they're going to prepare for their plan. And that's something also I heard one of our guests speaking about how they the marketing needs to plan for their marketing go-to-market events, and not knowing the schedule that would derail their plan. That's a big problem. So how do you, these are like both are very significant to business, right, in terms of deliverability. What are some of the challenges that you've run into, especially I think a CEO or others would say, why it takes so long, like, isn't it that you already have AI? Shouldn't be everything to tomorrow? So did you run into that question? How do you, what was taking so long?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think one of the ways that I'm looking to address that is to bring transparency and visibility to our executive team at the right level, using Dragonboat and some of the other tools, having monthly product update meetings, having regular demos with the team, and involving the larger team in some of the tough decision maker making that product managers need to make on a daily basis, right? We can have the best intentions in mind. We plan our quarter, right? We want to do so much, and it's tied to so many fantastic goals. And then we start executing, and inevitably, something comes along, right? Whether something disruptive happens and we need to shift in our roadmap and we need to abandon what we were working on, or maybe something that even though we've spent discovery time trying to figure out how a certain feature or functionality is going to work, turns out it's much more complex and we actually missed a whole segment of users or a certain part of the product that's very complex. Or maybe behind the scenes or under the covers, that's a legacy part of the product that's like spaghetti code, right? That as soon as you touch that, it's going to just explode. And the engineering team says, hey, we need to either, change our scope or we need to extend our timeline. So I think what's been happening before, all of those decisions were being done kind of in a vacuum, right? The teams would talk about it, they would have a plan, and they would eventually come up with a solution. But what was visible to the executive team is that we're late, or we're just, we're not gonna have all of the functionality plan delivered on that date, and that's disappointing to hear, right? So bringing the teams along on our process and our journey is super impactful and something that I'm hoping we're just starting the process now. So I'm hoping will open the communication and extend the decision making that sometimes it lands squarely on the product team to other teams as well to help us understand the priorities and make those tough prioritization decisions.
So you brought on two things. I think a lot of teams or even product managers are they try to do the right thing, but doesn't necessarily it's the right way to do it, right? So the transparency and also providing the context is just so important. I think one of the key things you mentioned is to say, hey, things take longer because something added to the roadmap, there was a trade-off. And that may or may not be visible to everyone who care about the original roadmap. So then once things get late, they feel impacted. So bring them in, understanding and be part of the decision making, or at least being informed, is really key. And being able to show them, I think one of the things Dragonboat has, I don't know, you tried it before, it's something we call a history snap. You can say, here's a roadmap and things changed. You can actually explain why changed, so you drive the people towards that alignment is the context, right? In the AI world, everything's a context, but in reality, is context, right? So
Yeah.
having a context is super, super helpful. The other part you mentioned, also wonder how you guys handle that, is the size of the work. I've talking to engineering teams and other product ops team before. Some people worry, say, I don't want to do estimate because we never right, we're always wrong. So we don't do estimate. And then you will never learn if you don't estimate, right? So that's a chicken and egg thing. But like you said, sometimes things take longer, but we didn't really know. And then you have to descope, and that's like also another hidden sort of the context people don't know. You create friction. So how do you make changes to that by doing estimate or others? Or how do you kind of learn that some things take longer or scope management? How do you handle that?
Yeah, so I feel like that's kind of a multifaceted problem, right? And it lays both with the product team and the engineering teams. But I feel like the product teams need to at least set up the engineering team for success, because otherwise it's really unfair for them to ask for estimates, or if we do, we should expect very padded, highly padded estimates that might or might not be true, might as well not have any estimates. So one of the things that I'm implementing with the teams is what I'm trying to do is to get the product managers as much to the left of the development as possible. So meaning I want them to start as early as possible on their discovery. What often ends up happening is that the team is so busy, right? Everybody's busy. Product managers are insanely busy. They're being pulled in many different directions. And what happens is that they don't really have enough time to do the true product work. Discovery, talking to users, thinking about all the different alternate scenarios, thinking about how the change might impact other products, how it might impact reporting, how it might impact the secondary user, etc. And because everyone is so busy, what was happening before is that the product managers knew that development on the calendar, on the roadmap, development is supposed to start a week from now. Great. I haven't even started writing PRDs or even thinking about this initiative. Well, I better get started, right? So sometimes a week before or even the night before, the product manager would sit down and write up the PRD. Can you get everything can you think of everything in one night or even one week? Absolutely not, right? So, but that was the reality. The engineering team would get that kind of high level happy world scenario PRD and try to get estimates. And then, of course, how can you be surprised that those estimates are not valid? Because there's a ton of alternate scenarios, a ton of other what ifs that need to be considered. So on the product side, I'm working really hard to move us as much to the left as possible to give us the time to do discovery, to do documentation, and to actually think before engineering gets involved. And of course, when engineering does get involved, other questions come up, and that this continuous discovery and iterative method, kind of iterative way of figuring out when things can be done, is born. What I'm encouraging my teams in terms of estimates is to not rely on them too heavily, especially in the beginning. Again, knowing from my entire career that it's very hard to predict engineering estimates. Let's put it out there. Let's create a roadmap. Let's set some expectations. This is how long we think it's going to take. At some point during the process, I feel like the teams should be able to tell us, okay, we've started this work. We're about, I don't know, 40, 50% complete. At this point, the teams should be able to tell us, okay, we feel that it's going to take another month, another 3 weeks, whatever that might be. And that way we can then establish our development end date and provide an accurate estimate that we can feel confident about. And then also allow enough time for any of the post-development activities, such as user acceptance testing, regression testing, documentation, training. That was another area that was kind of overlooked. And we would just rush to deliver as soon as development was finished, which is not the best approach.
Right, right. It's so great and refreshing. Thank you for sharing that. Is that if you you talk about two things, right? So there's obviously everyone think about development thinking that's all there is, but that's not
Yep,
true, right? There's a lot of things to the left of it and a lot of things to the right of it, right? So that whole
absolutely.
PDLC really is what it makes successful. And I really want to unpack a little bit a few things you mentioned. One is that you mentioned about the discovery, like, to think about different edge cases and, dependent things you need to change because the product is more than just that product team. That is just so important because I think when we don't spend time there, you end up paying your double and triple the development time because you keep identifying that you have the problem solving right on the spot. It's very expensive, right?
Absolutely.
And that's a part where I think I've run into companies, people say, why you have to do planning? Why can't you just like product engineers sit down together, just go code a vibe code and go out? I think it's okay when you have like a 0 to 1 product. They have not many existing use case and corner cases, but when you start have lots of customers, they have different edge cases, they have different, use cases and touch other area. You can't just go sit down and start go. You can, but it's going to be very expensive to
Mhm.
not thinking through and keep rework, right?
Yeah,
Um,
and
yeah, go
I
ahead.
just wanted to add, we've started to use Dragonboat's PDLC module or that page that you have within the portfolio management, and it's really helping because just to say, hey PMs, you need to start early, that doesn't work. Everybody knows they need to start early, right? So having some accountability and having some stages that we've developed as part of our product development life cycle, and having the individuals create a plan. It's not just for, them to do all of those steps. They can assign something to UX. Maybe there is an architect that needs to look into, how the product is designed behind the scenes. So I feel like it's really helping us shine the light into what's happening in that pre-phase to the left of development, and not discount it as it often happens, because everybody's hyper focused. Development, how long is it going to take? That's like the main block, and nobody thinks about the other blocks around it.
Wow, I'm so glad to hear you say that. I think that's, really cool to highlight. Like you said, people are so busy and they kind of mentally keep track on what they need to do, but you really lay on paper to see, okay, did I talk to UX? Did I do the discovery? Sometimes there are like legals or others to figure that out early. It's so good. It's not the time wasted because these other things has to be done. Like none of them cannot be done. But if you do it earlier, you can identify and adjust your approach potentially, right? If it turned out to be lots of legal, like you mentioned, some delay was like, oh, well, so we go into development, we figured out things are different. But if we find these things early, maybe we'll take a different approach. Maybe I won't even do this thing because the ROI doesn't make sense, right? So it's so good to hear that. So good. Cool. Thank you. Thank you for sharing.
Sure.
Now, you also share the second part, which is to the right of the product development. You talk about the go-to-market, you talk about the training. What are some of the things that your team typically do, and how are they done, and who's responsible and managing them?
Yeah, so that's the area that is really new, and it's kind of both a problem area and an opportunity for us at the same time. So, as I've mentioned, prior to me starting, a lot of the work was literally released as soon as development was done with QA too, but like as quickly as possible. And then the other teams needed to catch up as quickly as they could. So, marketing, if they were lucky, they might have heard that a certain initiative was coming because they happened to attend a certain meeting, right? Implementations team, hopefully have been working with the product manager and knew that functionality was coming, but they have not had a chance to actually play around with this and uncover how the new, setup needs to work. And that spanned all of this cross-functional teams. Sales was always in the dark of, exactly what's coming and when. Again, they had ideas. They've attended, some of the larger meetings, so they happen to be part of the smaller meetings, but it wasn't a consistent process that everybody could rely on. With the introduction of Dragonboat, what we've done is we've created, so we have a number of products. We have 7 different portfolios that we're managing across different teams. So we've created dashboards for each individual team, and each product manager manages that dashboard. And then on that dashboard, in addition to widgets and some of the, summaries and statistics that you can show on the dashboard, we're using the header of the dashboard to also communicate some of the other important things. So there are links to quarterly roadmaps. There are links to maybe wiki pages that show the release schedules for each product. Anything that the product managers want to communicate to their stakeholders is housed on that dashboard. That solves a couple of problems, right? So I've sent out dashboards to the team once, they bookmark it once, and that's the only link they need to save for that product. Once they go to that dashboard, they can find updated links that the product managers are, updating to depending on where they are in the cycle of development, so they can communicate what might be changing. So that's one way we're creating clarity and visibility into what's going on to other cross-functional teams. And we're kind of changing the mindset that instead of asking the product manager, when is this going to be delivered? When is development done? Hey, by the way, it's going to be done on such and such date, but you can also check out the dashboard, and I've updated my Gantt chart for this initiative, and it's scheduled to finish development by the end of March. So my hope is that slowly we will retrain and create this muscle memory within the organization to use Dragonboat as the source of truth. And then with that, we can also create some of the plans for that right side of development, right? So now marketing knows that a certain initiative is scheduled to complete by the end of March. They will proactively talk to the product manager about some of the go-to-market activities. Implementation has enough time to schedule UAT or some of the training sessions that are needed for the product managers. So we're creating an organization and a structure where it's kind of information flows both ways, right? So we're pushing it out in a consistent way through Dragonboat and communicating updates that way. And then also obviously expecting the stakeholders to go into Dragonboat together to get their own information because we are disciplined and we are, posting it there. And also product managers have certain milestones, certain meetings, certain updates that they're doing to the company or within the company to communicate what's going on, to create that clarity, visibility, and like I said, sometimes hard decisions that need to be made throughout the process.
Right. This is really great to hear. I think going back to the earlier challenges you mentioned, right? Most of the companies that throughout your career, throughout my career, is the lack of visibility in different fronts because people care about different things. So having ability to know what's going on and that product manager not stuck in the middle. Sometimes they kind of like stuck in the middle, right? So why things late? I didn't make it late, so to speak, right? But there are other things late. So I think having that visibility, one is you can see early indicators of things may be late, and then we can proactively discuss that. It's really cool to because everyone has their area of focus. Implementation needs the product to be somewhat there so that they can get their hands on. If they're not, then customers going to be impacted. So that understanding that dependency and then providing as early as possible information to them. And I really like the second part you had. I think it's genius, which is like the iterative planning. In the earlier stage, maybe you plan your roadmap a high level t-shirt sizing or somewhere. So you have a somewhat timeline, right? And then you also understanding things will change. So like halfway through or 40% in, you have another check-in on what is the likely timeline. This is really cool because then you have a higher level of confidence. Then you can engage the right side of PDLC teams. That's really cool. So you had quite a few kind of improvement that's been working or improving. This is really great. What are some of the things that is still struggling or challenging, or like you try to find a solution but not yet?
Yeah. So we're still trying to find our sweet spot with using AI to expedite our work. That's something that I'm hoping to focus on this year. I know there's a lot of different opportunities there, and I know that Dragonboat also offers AI capabilities. We're using some of the low-hanging fruit, right? Copilot. For example, we use user voice, which by the way also nicely integrates with Dragonboat, which we
Oh,
love. But user voice has a ton of ideas in an unstructured way, right? So we use AI to summarize it as we're beginning to work on a certain initiative. And that's been extremely helpful because it would have been impossible to go through all of that feedback manually, right? But I am hoping to find other ways how we can expedite, product and engineering work so that we're more nimble, right? I know there are agents out there that can learn about products and what the product is doing, both from the code perspective and the functionality perspective, and kind of act as support agents that can help answer the questions instead of having the team look into how certain functionality works to be able to answer a question. So I'm really looking forward to figuring that out and coming up with enhancements and shortcuts for the teams to move quicker and be much more nimble and more effective.
right, right. I think you just mentioned something really cool. That product managers are very busy. They get pulled in all directions for sure. Understanding customer feedback is definitely cool. A couple of things like you mentioned, like the Dragonboat AI, for example, we can also help you to identify things going to be available and when and alert you on bad data dependencies, and those also help your PMs be productive. I did hear you saying your PMs constantly get pulled into escalation, client calls, bug triaging. So how have you seen those things from company to company that are some of the practice are done better than the others? And what are some of the thoughts on addressing them today?
Yeah, I think some of that is inevitable, right? It's
Yeah.
just the world of product managers, and that's what we do. However, I think we all need to be intentional about reducing that noise because it's almost easier to kind of let your day go by in meetings with, maybe certain escalations or helping implementations figure something out or jumping on the client call or helping a sales team sell to the new prospect, right? Those things are fun and kind of easier to do and don't require as much mental power or capacity, right? Whereas true product work requires quiet time, requires that focus time that we sometimes put on our calendars and don't respect it ourselves, right? Where you need to sit down, you need to think, you need to draw things out, you need to flow things, you need to talk to somebody else and really do deep thinking work, which teams don't allow themselves to do. So it's one thing to be organized, and each individual needs to make that a priority for themselves. But another thing is to proactively figure out how to reduce those incoming calls for information that could be proactively shared. So, as I was mentioning before, publishing roadmaps and publishing certain information about upcoming releases proactively and pointing individuals to that and eventually training them to go there directly to get their answers is one of the biggest low hanging fruit that I see, where if we are proactive in sharing information and educating and communicating in a consistent way where someone can find the answer to their question, it could be not just about the release, it could be about the upcoming functionality. So if they know that a certain feature is on the Q1 roadmap, they can go to Dragonboat, they can click onto that feature. That feature will have an overview of kind of the goals, the objectives, why we're doing that. There's going to be a link in there to the PRD. If they want to double click into that, they can click into that and read the PRD to understand it a little bit better. And maybe even have an answer in there in terms of how something is going to work, because maybe there is also a prototype that's linked to that feature that walks them through how something is going to work. So creating information that's publicly available in a consistent way that can train the organization to go and get it themselves, I feel will help tremendously. Will be a huge help for our team. We're not there yet. We're still in the process of setting it up, but I'm really hopeful that it will help.
Yeah, I really like you had two parts I want to unpack. First part is well, I get the second part first. Second part is easy, right? So sharing information repetitively, it's not productive. So having a source of truth, people can self-help in any ways, then it would release the burden of the PM time to do something that's more strategic. I think that is so true. The second part, I think, that's the earlier part you mentioned, is that it's easy for us to get busy. Sometimes we let ourselves to be busy feel like that's helpful, but we're not focusing on most important things as a PM, which is the thinking about the outcome we're driving, the path that we have taken, and have we made the impact as we thought and where things are. So that is a very important thing. I think a lot of times either intentionally, subconsciously, or not unintentionally that busy took over. So a lot of times we ask PMs, they're drawn to say, I have all this feedback, I'm, helping success, we're doing this feature driving revenue. Those are all good. But what about you as a PM? Like where you ultimately want, not ultimately, well, there's ultimately, but there's also like near term. What are some of the key metrics I care for my product to indicate this is a good product, healthy product? And how do I know where I'm coming along, what I've done to make that change? And how's your team think
Absolutely.
about how you think about it?
Yeah, I think that's the hardest part of product management. In like all of the educational literature, that's something that each product manager needs to do, right? Set the goals, figure out how to measure them, and then actually report back and come back on whether or not the big bet, the initiative, actually made a dent in those goals. What ends up actually happening is that it's too hard to do that, right? It's too hard to get to the metrics. It's too hard to even think about the metrics, and how to then eventually get the data that's needed to prove one way or another. And also, a lot of times, that's just one part of it. Another one is that we all are running so quickly. As soon as the initiative is done, we're on to the next initiative, defining those requirements and working with those teams because we haven't the next timeline, the next due date to meet. And it's very, very hard to come back to what was done to see if the impact was actually complete or if it was successful, not successful, and how do we measure that, right? So I am looking forward to using some of Dragonboat's metrics module. I was just on the call earlier with Christian where he was showing me some of that. I do want to figure out how to slowly introduce that, and I'm being conscious of the fact that it's hard, right? So I want to be mindful of what the product team needs to do in order to be able to accomplish that. And I'm thinking the very easy one, quote unquote easy, right, is revenue, right? Revenue is already being published and is already recorded, right? And it's something that is split into individual products. And it's something that could be imported into Dragonboat and tied to individual initiatives. My plan is to start there and get the teams used to measuring at least that part of their initiatives. And then I know that's just one dimension of that,
Right.
the usability, how a certain functionality is being used or not being used. There are so many other ways to measure success, right? And my plan is to continue to build on that iteratively and figure out how else we can measure certain things that PMs might want to see. Because, like I said, it might be very difficult to get that. You might need to get certain tools to be able to do that, right? And if we
Right.
don't have those, maybe we can guess, or maybe we can use some database queries to get to that information. But it's definitely the hardest part to do, and something that ultimately just is not does not get done. And what the teams end up doing is looking at the bottom line, right? Which is important. Like,
Right.
how does the overall company continue to grow? But it's very hard in that story to understand what actually made the difference.
Right, right. I think you're spot on a few things. It's really hard to be product manager, right? Because the metrics is not so obvious and for sure. And then different areas could be different in metrics as well. And then getting them definitely is difficult. Having that in mind, I think it's at least the starting point. If I think I know some like I like how you get started. It's like start with the simple and the obvious and everyone can agree on, which is the revenue by product. So then everyone can tie to it, right? So say how many things we do to drive revenue. And then the other part is like, did it really drive revenue? It's a sales problem. It's an implementation. Like so, then we can kind of go into the next level. But to your point, though, I think that would like going back to the earlier challenge you mentioned is that because of so many stakeholders, their lack of a transparency. So then people always say, why can't it do faster? Why you do this, not the other ones? Having somewhat of a shared way to say, here's the reason why we do this versus this is helpful because at the end of the day, it's not product managers themselves make all the calls, right? It's never just a PM. Like you said, they did all this work in aligning stakeholders, but not visible to people say how that decision was made, you know?
And also to develop that muscle memory, right?
Right.
If that's not a step that the team is used to taking, both during planning and then after something launches, then it's always kind of an afterthought because, as we've been talking, right? The PMs are very busy. So they're moving on to the next thing. But if this is something that's part of PDLC and part of our process that we establish, that we make an effort and think through, okay, how are we going to actually measure those results? Are we going to automate that somehow, or are we going to manually look at certain indicators? Whatever that might be, developing that muscle, I think, is a slow, unfortunately, and deliberate task that the team needs to
Right.
take on.
Right. Right. So, what are some of the other challenges that you like to cover, like in our chat today, and also share with the others?
Yeah. So one thing that I wanted to mention is that I think product operations is super hard, right? I think a lot of people undermine how complex it is and the resources needed to implement product operations within an organization. Just getting a tool like Dragonboat, that's the first step. It's a great first step, but then it does take effort and deliberate kind of thinking and planning to put that in place. And as a product ops kind of leader, you need to be mindful of kind of walking that fine line of making enough progress, right? So incrementally using the tool in line with maybe the planning cycle that is part of the product operations, and then introducing modules that exist within Dragonboat and showing the team how using Dragonboat can help them versus just create more work. That's a challenge, right? So a lot of times the teams view that, oh, that's just another thing that I need to do. And my goal has been to show them, yes, maybe initially it's going to be a little bit more work. And I do everything that I can to kind of ease that burden of the team by thinking of templates and creating templates for them and showing them how to use that. But I want to eventually be able to show them that, hey, by doing this, now you have free time, as we were talking before. Now you get fewer questions about when something is going to be done because they can go and see it for themselves. Now you don't have to create a ton of Excel spreadsheets for your capacity planning with the engineering team during planning, right? You can use it right there within the tool, and everybody can have one source of truth, and it's already preset for you. It's working the way it's supposed to be. So so the fine line that I was talking about before is introducing change slowly enough, but yet fast enough to be able to make progress and make changes in product operations, but still get uh, what's the word? Still get buy-in, right? And using the product in the way that it should be used to actually recognize some of the operational efficiencies that it can actually bring to the table. And it can take probably at least a year, if not more, to get to that point. And bringing the teams, the product team, the engineering team, and the stakeholders along is a process. It requires reminders, it requires training, it requires showing them the way, and it needs to be truly deliberate for it to be successful.
I think you're so spot on. I think also, I think any ops roles are challenging, but product ops roles are more challenging. Let me explain. Here's how I see it. Because if you're engineer, individual engineering ops were managing engineers, it's one level of the multiplier, right? You think about the product ops, like product teams already like a very cross-functional, like one product manager touches so many different areas. Product ops one layer above or even another layer above. So the number of the people you are going to touch directly, indirectly is tremendous. So even a small change has a much bigger impact. So many people are going to feel a ripple effect on that as well. So like you said, product ops is very challenging, but it's so critical a role because the company spend more than half the budget on product engineering, right? And then, like you said, they all tied to revenue. Sales says to sell something, right? You don't have a good product, customer gonna churn. In both cases, it's a tremendously important. And I'm glad that more companies start to see how important it is for product ops to make the product and engineering and a broader org, PDLC, work more efficiently. Because if you're not, the company in general would be impacted, right? Like a revenue ops. It's not an easy job, but why you have revenue ops? And why you have people to using consistent standard and process? Because standard process is a process you learn from failures. So you put things around so you don't repeat the failure, right? So that's why we have process, not just for the sake of having that. So I think I really appreciate you're so deliberate in thinking about the challenges and so deliberate thinking about how to get incremental value for the organization and also getting not much of the changes all at once. It's just so spot on. Thank you. It's just so amazing. I really enjoy talking to you. This is awesome.
Yeah, and I just want to add, lastly, the reception has been great. I have to say, even with all the changes, the teams understand the clarity that the tool can offer and just overall product operations and the processes behind them. So there's been excitement, and kind of some people say we can see the light at the end of the tunnel, right? So I'm excited to continue on this journey, and I'm taking Dragonboat with me.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Tanya. I really appreciate it.